is that he has, and it was written in real time, so it ends back then. Roosevelt's art is that he has combined familiar ideas with familiar methods in such a way as to produce something so unfamiliar that we have no word for it. It is creative statesmanship to produce a revolution of minds without a conflict of bodies, to usher in a new era without bloodshed, disorder, or despair. So that's kind of a nifty way to start a thoughtful recitation of FDR's enormous impact on the country. Ordinary ideas, there were a lot of people who thought these things before they became the New Deal, but put them together in a way that is so remarkable that it created a revolution without any disorder or despair. I am a FDR fan. I come to it kind of the way you do, by virtue of family. Although my dad didn't work for FDR, he thought FDR was far and away the greatest president in the history of the United States for saving the world twice. Once from the Great Depression and then from Nazi Germany. And I grew up in a household where FDR was the political patron saint, and with good reason, I think. So I did a little research today. Bear with me. You may all know this chapter and verse, but I enjoyed digging back into my record of FDR's first steps into the White House. First, actually, step into the White House. First role in the White House, because he was already in his wheelchair. So I wanted to start with the humor and resolve that FDR showed when he flew to Chicago to accept the nomination. As you know, no president went to the convention previously. They were supposed to stay home and wait to be informed by the delegation they'd been nominated. But FDR took the enormously remarkable, unprecedented measure of flying to Chicago to accept the nomination. And in that speech, that was the first time, to my knowledge, that the term "the New Deal" appeared. In fact, it didn't appear in his inaugural address. It appeared in his acceptance speech. So here's what he said, July 2nd, 1932. And I think it's FDR to the max. It's humor and resolve. He says, the appearance before a national convention of its nominee for president to be formally notified of his selection is unprecedented and unusual, but these are unprecedented and unusual times. My friends, may this be the symbol of my intention to be honest and to avoid all hypocrisy or sham, to avoid all silly shutting of the eyes to the truth in the campaign. You have nominated me, and I know it, and I am here to thank you for the honor. This is where the humor part comes in. He says, let it also be symbolic that in so doing, I broke traditions. Let it be, from now on, the task of our party to break foolish traditions. We will break foolish traditions and leave it to the Republican leadership, far more skilled in that art, to break promises. Right? That's FDR. If you remember some of his other speeches, his speech later on where he talks about never talk of rope in the house of someone who's been hanged. I mean, he had this knack of poking the Republicans. I've never seen an elephant able to turn a handstand without falling flat on its back, he said. Well, later on in his acceptance speech, he says, what do the people of America want more than anything else? In my mind, two things. Work with all the moral and spiritual values that go with work. And with work, a reasonable measure of security. Security for themselves and for their wives and children. Work and security. These are more than words. These are more than facts. They are the spiritual values, the true goal toward which our efforts of reconstruction should lead. So it's a values-driven revolution. Then comes his inaugural address, which I think is one of the greatest speeches in American history. And again, it melds words and action. So it does begin with the famous quote, "So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." And then at the end he says, "We do not distrust the future of essential democracy. The people of the United States have not failed. In their need, they have registered a mandate that they want direct, vigorous action. They have asked for discipline and direction under leadership. They have made me the present instrument of their wishes. In the spirit of the gift, I take it." So what was the circumstance when FDR became president? Well, if you do a little work, fun reading, great series of books by Arthur Schlesinger Jr. on the crisis of the world order, the coming of the New Deal. In a chapter called "The Contagion of Fear," Schlesinger lays out what was going on in the country leading up to FDR becoming president. We can't even conceptualize this. At least I can't. The circumstances are so dire and unimaginable that the numbers don't even describe it. By the spring of 1930, at least 4 million Americans were unemployed. Breadlines began to reappear in large cities for the first time since 1921. Lines of embarrassed men shuffling patiently forward for a chance at a piece of bread and a cup of coffee. In New York City, it was reported in March that the number of families on relief had increased 200% since the crash in October. The municipal lodging houses were now crowded. Nearly half of the first 14,000 admitted were first-timers, and the city was letting homeless men sleep on the municipal barge as it tied up at the dock at night, where the icy wind whipped across the East River. In Detroit, said William Green of the AFL, quote, "The men are sitting in the parks all day long and all night long, hundreds and thousands of them muttering to themselves, out of work, seeking work." Fast forward to 1932, the crisis of 1932. More statistics from Mr. Schlesinger. Unemployment rose, says Schlesinger, 4 million in 1930, 8 million in 1931, 12 million in 1932. Nearly 1 out of every 4 workers in the nation seeking a job. Net investment in 1931 was minus $358 million in 1929 prices. The next year it fell to a disheartening minus $5.8 billion. Federal Reserve Board Index of Manufacturing Production went down from 110 in 1929 to 57 in 1932. Wage payments from $50 billion to $30 billion. And as prices and income fell, the burdens of indebtedness, farm mortgages, railroad bonds, municipal and state debts became unsupportable. The year 1932 brought new anguish. By spring, when United States Steel made its second large wage slash, the attempt to maintain pay scales had pretty well foundered. By the end of the year, the weekly wage in iron and steel averaged 63% less than in 1929. The Pennsylvania Department of Labor reported in July 1932 that wages had fallen to 5 cents an hour in sawmills, 6 cents in brick and tile manufacturing, 7.5 cents in general contracting. In Malvern, Arkansas, lumber workers received 10 cents an hour. Women in Tennessee mills were paid as little as $2.39 for a 50-hour week. This is it's unimaginable. And then comes Inauguration Day. And here's what Roosevelt saw on Inauguration Day. In addition to a rainy, windswept Capitol, the national income was less than half of what it had been 4 short years before. We're desperately seeking jobs. The machinery for sheltering and feeding the unemployed was breaking down everywhere under the growing burden. And a few hours before, in the early morning before the inauguration, every bank in America had locked its doors. It was now just a matter of staving off. It was now, at least some so thought, even revolution. Okay, so you're Franklin Delano Roosevelt. What do you do? Here's what he did. In addition to inventing the thing we're all of us elected officials are now cursed with, which is what did you do in your first 100 days? Here's what he did in his first 100 days. March 9th, the Emergency Banking Act. March 20th, the Economy Act. March 31st, establishment of the CCC. April 19, abandonment of the gold standard. May 12th, the Federal Emergency Relief Act, setting up a national relief system. May 12th, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, establishing a national agricultural policy with the Thomas Amendment, conferring on the President powers of monetary expansion. May 12th, the Emergency Farm Mortgage Act, providing for the refinancing of farm mortgages. May 18th, the Tennessee Valley Authority Act, providing for the unified development of the Tennessee Valley. May 27th, the Truth in Securities Act, requiring full disclosure in the issue of new securities. June 5th, the abrogation of the gold clause in public and private contracts. June 13th, the Homeowners Loan Act, providing for the refinancing of home mortgages. June 16th, the National Industrial Recovery Act, providing both for a system of industrial self-government under federal supervision and for a $3.3 billion public works program. June 16th, the Glass-Steagall Banking Act, divorcing commercial and investment banking and guaranteeing bank deposits. June 16th, the Farm Credit Act, providing for the reorganization of agricultural credit activities. June 16th, the Railroad Coordination Act, setting up a federal coordinator of transportation. This was the 100 days, and in this period, Franklin Roosevelt sent 15 messages to Congress, guided 15 major laws to enactment, delivered 10 speeches, held press conference and cabinet meetings twice a week, conducted talks with foreign heads of state, sponsored an international conference, made all the major decisions in domestic and foreign policy, and never displayed fright or panic, and rarely even bad temper. His mastery astonished many who thought they had long since taken his measure. Norman Davis, encountering Raymond Fosdick outside the presidential office, expressed the incredulity of those who had worked with him during the Wilson administration. Ray, that fellow in there is not the fellow we used to know. There's been a miracle here. Many of us who have known him long and well, wrote Oswald Garrison Villard, the editor of The Nation, ask ourselves if this is the same man. And finally, a quote from FDR, and this is, I think, the character of the leader that he was. This is, again, from Schlesinger's book. He says, he quotes from FDR, "Let's concentrate upon one thing," Roosevelt told his old friend from Wilsonian days, Dan Roper, "save the people and the nation. And if we have to change our minds twice every day to accomplish that end, we should do it." And when Tugwell once gloomily remarked that they were in for the worst economic difficulties the country had ever known, Roosevelt replied with mingled dread and exhilaration, "Yes, I know it, but there is nothing to do but meet every day's troubles as they come. What terrible decisions we'll have to make, and sometimes we'll be wrong. So that's the celebration today. An incredible saving of our country, of the economy, putting people back to work, creating a New Deal and then a second New Deal, and leaving us a legacy here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, not just of buildings, but of a model of how to tackle difficult times with resolve, humor, character, and 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was inaugurated as our nation's 32nd president, and as president, FDR created a number of work programs which gave Americans young and old the opportunity to have employment, which helped them to dig out of the hard times of the Great Depression. And whereas the federal programs that provided help to New Mexicans included the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, the Works Project Administration, WPA, the Federal Art Project, FAP, Federal Music Project, FMP, Federal Writers Project, FWP, the National Youth Administration, NYA, the Social Security Program, SSI, the Rural Electric Administration, and more programs that touch the lives of New Mexico residents. And whereas the city of Santa Fe was fortunate to have buildings, parks, streets, sewers, acequias, and the first airport and municipality of additional New Deal projects built and produced by citizens who worked in New Deal programs, and whereas many of the accomplishments of the New Deal programs in Santa Fe continue to serve our residents 90 years later, now therefore I, Allan M. Webber, Mayor of the City of Santa Fe, New Mexico, do hereby proclaim Saturday, March 4th, 2023 as New Deal Day in honor of the anniversary of the beginning of New Deal programs in the USA, in the state of New Mexico, and in the city of Santa Fe. It is New Deal Day. To you for safekeeping.
Oh, thank you. Could we take you all over the stage?
Right now? I got something to do today.
Oh, what a wonderful. And, you know, I introduced one person, but I want to introduce another person. Board member Jan Marfleck. And Jan, would you share your experience as a child and your family's experience with the New Deal?
You put me in front of all these people?
That's right. Love it.
Okay. Unaccustomed to as I am.
It's a small speech here.
My dad was enlisted as a New Deal artist back in the 40s. I'm a hell of a lot older than I look. I'll be 90 in 2 months. I lived in Roswell with him for a year and a half. He was sent here by New York on a project to teach Native Americans and Hispanic students to crawl. The interesting thing is, as you probably know, I'm very political. Roswell is a very Republican area. It was an art center there run by Roland Dickey. And my dad was not allowed to teach in what is now part of the museum. The original was just a simple building. The board here would not let him do that. So how come a Catholic priest using an annex and taught students there? We spent a year and a half, and then we were called back. They wanted to keep him here for another 2 years, but New York insisted that he come back. He was an immigrant from Milwaukee, which was the first gen, and went to art school in New York. He was a contemporary of guys like Jackson Pollock, the biggest drunk in the world. That's the end of it.